What's going on, Atlanians? Today we're going to be talking about the NA Top 300 class distribution for solo PvP in Crystal of Atlan as of 5/31. So that means even now, when you're watching this, some of this information may have already changed. In fact, from the time in which we took this information, the top 300 for diamond ranks stopped at rank 150. Within that top 300, the lowest diamond was at rank 150. Now we're looking at it being right there at that 200. So within less than 24 hours, we've had another 50 players rank up into diamond. Classes are shifting all over the place constantly. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this shapes up over the next week. But regarding the information that we took from that top 300 at that time, there's some things to look at and some things to take into account. In terms of top 25, Gunner was the most powerful or most represented with 8 people there in that top 25. However, the most represented class in the top 300 as a whole was Starbreaker. And there's definitely some reasons for this. Starbreaker is very popular. There are a lot of people playing Starbreaker, which leads to there being a very good chance of them being more so represented on the PvP ladder. However, I do also think Starbreaker is a very good, noob stomper. It's a very good beginner stomper, so it's going to get up through gold even really quickly, just because of how effective the class is, especially against people who are still learning. It was very new player friendly for high effectiveness. And part of that was because Starbreaker has an almost complete kit for PvP at that level 32 to 45 range. So in those first couple of days, it was very strong. It had one of the most complete playstyles that a class could have at that time. Unlike, say, Warlock, which really struggles to do much below level 45, getting that second awakening, and then even beyond level 45 with some of its higher level abilities that really help bring that class together. And, at the time of when we went through this list originally, there were a lot of Warlocks that had started making their way up. Now today, on June 1st, is when level 60 is pretty much available for everybody who started on Eudora 1 through 5. For some of the Eudora servers that opened up later, it's going to be another day or so until they are going to be the majority of their servers hitting level 60. And so some classes are still, some of that information is still going to be incomplete. So it's going to be interesting to look at this again in a week when we have time with everybody being at level 60, having their complete kits, doing PvP, and learning their matchups against one another and seeing how this class distribution is going to change. Now, back to that about Starbreaker, a lot of people were learning in the first couple days. It was a very easy class to pick up and learn. It was very effective, and it had a very complete kit. So I think that's a big reason why Starbreaker is so heavily represented right now. However, there were a lot of Starbreakers that were downranking when we were going through the information. Now, that might be replaced by more Starbreakers in the coming week. We'll see. But we had seen the day before on 5/30, there were no Magiblades to be seen anywhere. And now there were at least 11, which even before then, there was one Magiblade in the top 25, and it was low down. But now there's even a Magiblade up here in the top 10 at rank 8. And everybody was saying Magiblade was really weak. Magiblade is a class that gets better at higher levels, especially starting at level 50 plus. You start to get the things like your seal and the relics, and those PvP pieces have their own types that you can select from that give a little bit of additional stats. And for a class like Magiblade, they have things that, like attack speed, gives their attacks to do more hits. They have attacks that do more strikes based on what their attack speed is. And so that type of stuff can help with Magiblade's burst combinations to maybe they don't have to combo as heavy, that type of deal. But Magiblade is also still it was very incomplete at a lower level. And people were still learning. A lot of people are still learning. Magiblade, for all we know, can still do really well. In the long term of it all, we may see a lot more of them rise up in the coming week, as well as Warlocks. Warlocks are starting to really come into their place now that they have a complete kit at that level 50 plus range. And so I think we're going to see an interesting shift in the players, in the classes that we see in this top 300 in the coming week. I think we're going to see a lot of class shifts happen, and I'm looking forward to that. Now, looking back at this chart, like we said, Starbreaker, very highly represented. Cloudstrider, there were only 11 Cloudstriders, none of them in the top 25. Cloudstrider is one of the classes that I do think is very underrepresented right now. I partly think it's because a lot of people are playing Starbreaker because it was easier to climb with initially. But also, Cloudstrider is one of the more tricky classes for some people to learn. At least that's how it seems. It requires, understanding what each of your element types do in terms of how it modifies the abilities and using the appropriate abilities based on their damage scaling or what their animation effect is and how that works out. It also is a class that is very effective being played aerial style, which is something a lot of people have had some difficulty learning how to do or learning to fight against. And so sometimes when you do find those really good Cloudstriders, it can catch you off guard because they're so uncommon. Scytheguards, very common and popular class. I think this is one of the classes we're going to see more of show up in the top 25, as well as the top 300 as a whole. There was only one of them in the top 25 at this time, but I think we will see some more come in there, as this class was this class was touted as being very good on China as well. However, the PvP scene is a little bit different over there, as they have some other classes that are currently out. Blaidemaidens, again, only 11, like Cloudstrider, and had none in the top 25. This is one of the classes that has been one of the most underrepresented in the game as a whole right now. Starting to see some of them a little bit in PvP, solo queue and threes. There have been times where in threes I've seen them do really well, and this may just be because, their class seems relatively static in place for a lot of their abilities, and so in threes they're able to get opportunities to really shine as a secondary engager and really put out some big damage for their team. So it's going to be interesting to see if we see some more Blaidemaidens rise up. We know that Scytheguards and Blaidemaidens were a lot more well represented in EU. There is just a very different class approach in EU from what a lot of people have said. Warlocks, 13 of them. Like I said, the Warlocks are starting to show up a little bit in that top 300 now that their classes have a complete kit. They're in that level 55 plus range, and they're starting to rise up on that list. I think we will see a lot more Warlocks in the coming days, especially because a lot of people haven't had chances to fight against them, and so they don't know how to fight against them. And so I think there will be some Warlocks catching people off guard. We do then have Magicians. Big favorite for a lot of people. A lot of people love Magician's playstyle. At that time, there was only one Warlock in the top 25, by the way. Magician, only one. So despite there being significantly more Magicians than there were Warlocks, they're not as represented. They're not higher represented in that top 25 spot. So those classes are still there, same there. But Magician is a very popular class for the mages as well. It has a very unique playstyle, a little goofy, silly as well, turning people into dolls with some skills, bubbles being blown everywhere. And so Magician has been a very interesting class for people to play against, and a very fun one for people to play as. I think Magicians are actually going to stay kind of where they are right now. We're not really going to see them move too much. We might see a couple more rise into the top 300, and maybe a couple more into the top 25, but I don't think we're going to see a big shift in them particularly. Elementalist, I'm a little hesitant with Elementalists. We have 26 of them right now represented in the top 300 and 3 currently in the top 25. But some of this is by some people who did play on other regions. So, how much of that is knowledge gapping people versus actual, like, class gapping per se, the class being really strong. Like, I'm not saying Elementalist is weak by any means whatsoever, but, there's 3 of them in the top 25, but you really don't see any Elementalists in the lower ranks. And so I'm wondering if Elementalist is mostly represented right now by veteran players who have experience with the class, and those few have really risen up with that class as a whole and are the ones representing that top 300, which not a bad thing, but I don't think Elementalist is as easily approached to for the average player. I didn't really see any in the platinum range in that time there. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not we see more Elementalists, or if the same amount of Elementalists stay in the top 300 currently, or if we even just see, we see a few get bumped out as it is. Magiblade. Oh, and there, yeah. So there were the three that were there in the top 25. Magiblade, 11. At the time, the day before, Magiblade was almost nowhere to be seen on the top 300. Now there's 11 of them, and there's one in the top 25. I think we're going to see a lot more Magiblades. In fact, one of the Magiblades is now even top 10, right? So they've moved up even higher. And so I think it's going to be interesting. I think Magiblade is going to be one of those classes that we see more of entering that top 300 space, and even that top 25 space. So it's going to be really curious at that time to see how that's going to shape out in the next week, now that that class has a complete kit, the complete PvP gear loadout, all that stuff. I think we are definitely going to see more Magiblades rising up. Zerkers were another one that were pretty well-rounded off the rip as a class and were pretty effective. We do only have 2 Zerkers in the top 25, but for a while, that rank 1 spot was held by Ndisu, but he has now been moved out of it by Odinzada. And so Zerkers, I think we're going to see maybe 1 or 2 more enter that top 25 ranking area, but we will see more Zerkers as a whole, I believe, entering that top 300 space. The class is very solid. I think it's just some people have had a difficult time understanding how the HP mechanic works for him with the shielding and how his class works as a whole. Unfortunately, Zerker does have that problem of just like, it feels bad the way its passive works currently, in that, you get them to 0 and they enter that undying state for a period of time, but all that really just results in is people running around for 5, 6, 7 seconds until your character falls over, sort of deal. And so that feels kind of bad. It almost feels like you should just fall over anyways. But sometimes you do have situations where you are actually able to finish somebody off in those remaining couple seconds that you have. Very rare edge case though, from what I've seen. Bounty Hunters are a class that I think we are definitely going to see more of entering the top 300. Maybe not a ton more, but I definitely think we're going to see probably maybe like 5 more entering that top 300 space. The class is very combo heavy, and I think that is a little more difficult for some people to come to terms with learning. But the class does have very high damage capabilities, and I think that's just taking some time for people to, learn around, but also because its counterpart class is really effective for different reasons and more direct reasons. But there are 2 bounty hunters currently in the top 25, but we might see that change a little bit in the coming weeks. Gunners, there were 42. This was the second most popular class in the top 300, and it is the most represented class in the top 25. And this is because Gunner was one of the classes that was highly effective as well in that level 32 to 45 range. It had a really difficult kit to deal with, especially for those that learned how to aerial battle early on. Gunner is a menace in the sky, despite the giant cannon that they're holding. They're actually able to even like fly around on it above your head. So, if you see a gunner go up into the sky and they get on their, launcher and they ride around with it, that still puts the fire all over the ground, even while it's way up in the sky. And so it's able to, you're able to stay out of harm's way, stay out of range of a lot of classes that could use a medium armor break skill or armor break skill on you to knock you out of it, as opposed to if you were riding on the ground, up in the sky, a lot of classes aren't going to be able to disrupt that. And then they have a multitude of abilities that they can use while in the sky that are still going to either hit you from being up in the air, or they move the animations of the skills move to that ground level and are able to attack you directly there on the ground level also. And so Gunner has been highly effective for a lot of people, and it was definitely very effective for those that knew how to take advantage of it early on and rank very high very quickly. But like we said, that is the current class distribution situation as of 5/31. It's already changed a lot in the first day of people being 60. So we're going to, wait out through the week. We'll talk about it on stream as the week goes on and seeing how things shift. But we'll come back to you with another video with new numbers, new information next week to see how it has all changed, with everybody being level 60 for a week, people learning their classes, people learning their matchups, and seeing how this meta will shift in time given people's experience. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you ever have any questions or want to just talk about the game in general, you can catch us live on Twitch at twitch.tv/ZZav. Thank you, take care, and have a good one.